So here's something I noticed. Samsung just put a privacy screen directly into the display hardware of the S26 Ultra, not software, not a stick-on film you buy separately, built into the panel itself. And I sat with that for a moment because for years we've been talking about who has the better camera, who charges faster, who has more megapixels, but a hardware privacy layer, that's not a spec war, that's a behavior shift. What caught my attention wasn't the feature itself. It's that Samsung looked at how people actually use phones in public and decided to solve a problem most reviewers barely mention. Meanwhile, Apple is rumored to be making the dynamic island 35% smaller. And that kind of tells you everything about where these two companies are aiming. Let's back up. It's March 2026. The Galaxy S26 Ultra has been in stores for a few weeks now, launched February, available March 11th. Starting price sits around $1,299 for the 256 gigs model, climbing to $1,500 to $1,800 for higher configurations. The iPhone 18 Pro Max, we're still in rumor territory. Apple's not expected to announce until September. At first, this sounded like the usual release cycle. Samsung goes first, Apple responds, standard playbook. But here's where it gets interesting. The S26 Ultra is complete, reviewable, in people's hands, and it's packing hardware decisions that feel like answers to questions Apple hasn't even asked yet. That privacy screen I mentioned, it uses something called Flex Magic Pixel OLED, a hardware-driven feature that physically limits viewing angles. You decide who sees your screen, no software workaround, no compromise. Now, is this revolutionary? No, but it's thoughtful, and thoughtfulness in hardware is rare these days. Let me walk you through what Samsung actually shipped. The S26 Ultra runs on Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5, a custom for Galaxy variant worldwide. No more Exynos regional splits, 12 or 16 gigs of LPDDR5X RAM, storage options at 256, 512 gigs, and 1 terabyte. The display is a 6.9-inch dynamic AMOLED 2X panel, 3120 by 1440 resolution, adaptive 1 to 120 Hz refresh rate, Corning Gorilla Armor 2 on top. That's the spec sheet version. What matters more is the weight. 214 grams, roughly 163.6 by 78.1 by 7.9 millimeter dimensions, and it still supports the S Pen. That's notable because every year we hear that stylus support, it's niche, that nobody uses it. But Samsung keeps shipping it anyway. And the people who do use it, they don't want anything else. So this is where I think the enthusiast discourse misses something. Online conversations optimize for specs that win arguments. Most actual users optimize for tools that fit their workflow. The S Pen crowd isn't loud, but they're loyal. And Samsung knows exactly who they're building for. The camera setup is a lot. 200 megapixel primary sensor at f1.4, 50 megapixel ultra wide, 50 megapixel 5 times periscope telephoto, plus a 10 megapixel 3 times telephoto and a 12 megapixel selfie camera on the front. 4 rear cameras, different focal lengths, different use cases. So what this tells me is that Samsung isn't trying to win on computational photography alone. They're throwing hardware at the problem, physical versatility, zoom that genuinely works across distances. The 200 megapixel main sensor with that 1.4 aperture is designed for light intake. Low light performance, detail retention when you crop. Is it overkill for the average user? Probably. But here's the thing. Samsung isn't building for the average user here. This is the Ultra, the I want everything tier. And the camera array reflects that philosophy. Battery sits at 5,000 milliamps. Wired charging hits 60 watts. Wireless at 15 watts. Reverse wireless included. That's the progression that stands out to me. 60 watts wired is a meaningful jump from previous Samsung flagships. For years, Samsung was conservative on charging speeds, while Chinese manufacturers pushed 80, 100, even 120 watts. This doesn't catch up to those numbers, but it signals that Samsung recognized the gap and closed it enough. Now, here's where interpretation matters. The 5000 milliamps battery isn't the largest on the market, but paired with the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5's efficiency improvements, real-world endurance should be competitive, maybe better than competitive. The clearer pattern here is that Samsung is playing a balanced game, not chasing every extreme, but not ignoring legitimate complaints either. Now, let's talk about what Apple is apparently building. The iPhone 18 Pro Max, as expected September 2026, is rumored to start around $1,199 to $1,299 for base models, possibly higher for storage tiers. The display, 6.9-inch LTPO OLED, approximately 2,868 by 1,320 resolution, 120 Hertz ProMotion, and that 35% smaller dynamic island I mentioned earlier. Here's where I initially thought, okay, so Apple is refining as usual. But then I saw the weight rumors. The device might exceed 240 grams, Apple's heaviest iPhone yet. Why? Because the chassis is apparently thicker to accommodate a larger battery. That's when it started to look different. Apple is willing to make the phone heavier, noticeably heavier. In an era where every manufacturer obsesses over thinness, Apple is choosing battery capacity over weight reduction. That doesn't look accidental. The A20 Pro chip is built on TSMC's 2-nanometer process, rumored efficiency gains of 15 to 30% over the A19 series, 12 gigs RAM standard. Now, raw performance numbers, single core versus multi-core, will sort themselves out in benchmarks. That's not the interesting part, but what's interesting is the efficiency angle. Apple's silicon strategy has always been do more with less power, and a 2-nanometer process with that level of efficiency improvement suggests Apple is betting on battery life as a differentiator. The rumored battery capacity, 5,100 to 5,200 milliamperes. That's technically smaller than some competitors. But with iOS optimization and that A20 Pro efficiency, it could deliver better real-world endurance than phones with larger cells. That's the Apple playbook. Optimize the entire stack. Don't just add bigger numbers. Here's where Samsung maintains a clear advantage. iPhone 18 Pro Max charging, approximately 40 watts wired, 25 watts MagSafe wireless versus Samsung's 60 watts wired, 15 watts wireless. Samsung wins on wired speed. Apple's MagSafe is more convenient for wireless users, but slower overall. This gap has existed for years, and at this point, I don't think Apple views charging speed as a priority battlefield, which is a choice. For power users who need quick top-ups, Samsung's approach is objectively better. For users who charge overnight or have MagSafe chargers everywhere, Apple's slower speeds may not register as a problem. Different priorities, different trade-offs. iPhone 18 Pro Max cameras, triple 48 megapixel array, main camera possibly with variable aperture for Pro Max, adjustable light intake and depth control, ultra wide, improved telephoto/periscope, zoom, front camera potentially upgraded to 24 megapixel. Compared to Samsung's 4-camera hardware assault, Apple's approach looks restrained, but here's the context. Apple's camera philosophy has always been computational photography. Hardware provides the foundation and software does the heavy lifting. Video quality, HDR processing, subject detection. These are software strengths. Samsung's approach is more literal. Throw more sensors at more focal lengths. Give users physical versatility. Neither is wrong. They're just different strategies for different users. What's revealing is that Apple is rumored to be Exploring variable aperture. That's a hardware feature Samsung has used for years. If Apple implements it, that's acknowledgement that some hardware flexibility matters, even in a computational photography world. This is where the article gets particularly interesting. Samsung's AI approach with the S26 Ultra emphasizes agentic tools, Bixby enhancements for call screening, productivity automation, practical features that do things for you. Apple's approach, based on current trajectory, focuses on privacy-centric, on-device processing, different philosophies, different trust models. Samsung is betting that users want AI to actively help, even if that means more cloud processing. Apple is betting that users want AI that respects data boundaries, even if that limits capability. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Most users want helpful AI. Most users also have vague privacy concerns. How those concerns manifest in purchasing decisions, still unclear. What I can say is this: Samsung's agentic direction feels like an attempt to make AI tangible. Call screening, task automation, things you can point to and say, that's AI doing something useful. Apple's approach is more invisible, on-device processing, privacy preservation, important but harder to market. Here's where most comparison videos end with, buy what fits your ecosystem, and that's true, but it's also incomplete. And the ecosystem question isn't just about convenience, it's about switching costs, investment, muscle memory. If you own a Mac, iPad, AirPods, Apple Watch, leaving iPhone means leaving features that tie those devices together: iMessage, handoff, universal control. If you live in Google's world, use Windows, prefer customizability. Samsung offers more flexibility. The S Pen adds a productivity dimension iPhone doesn't attempt. Multitasking on Android remains more robust. The article notes this correctly. Ecosystem loyalty often decides, but I'd go further. Ecosystem loyalty isn't just habit. It's accumulated value. Every year you stay, the cost of leaving increases. This is by design. Both Apple and Samsung have built ecosystems that reward continued investment. The phone is the hub. The rest of your devices are the spokes. Leaving the hub means rebuilding everything. One more thing. The article mentions that Apple's September event will likely include the iPhone 18 Pro Max alongside Apple's first foldable. That's significant because if Apple enters the foldable space, the iPhone 18 Pro Max isn't just competing with the S26 Ultra, it's competing for attention within Apple's own lineup. Imagine this scenario. You're an Apple user deciding between the iPhone 18 Pro Max and Apple's new foldable. Same ecosystem, different form factors. That's a choice Samsung doesn't have to worry about yet. But it changes how Apple positions the Pro Max. If the foldable becomes the innovation story, the Pro Max becomes the safe, refined, maximum capability story. That's a different narrative than previous years. So what's actually happening here? Samsung shipped a phone that solves real problems: privacy in public, charging speed, camera versatility, stylus support. It's available now. It's expensive but predictable. Apple is preparing a phone that doubles down on efficiency, ecosystem integration, and chip optimization. It's coming later. It might be heavier. It might have better battery life despite a smaller cell. Two companies, two strategies. Samsung is building for the user who wants features now. Hardware innovation that tangibly changes how you use the device. Apple is building for the user who trusts the ecosystem. Optimization over flash, refinement over experimentation. Neither approach is universal, and that's the real story. This isn't a battle for everyone. It's a battle for the people already committed to one path or the other. The specs matter, sure, but the philosophy matters more. Because when you look at the S26 Ultra's privacy screen or the iPhone 18 Pro Max's rumored weight gain, you're not seeing random decisions. You're seeing companies who know exactly who their customers are and are building accordingly. The question isn't which phone is better. The question is which philosophy fits how you actually live. See you next one. Peace out.